Please be seated. There's a grumbling again, right here in the gospel. Through the rustling of garments as the people gathered near to listen to Jesus, there is a grumbling rising in the crowd. Look at him. How could he? He was raised better, they seem to say. Can you imagine the scene? I mean, the nerve of Jesus, really, committing what could only be described as a social faux pas, gathering with questionable folks and sharing in the joy of conversation and a meal. Oh yes, there is a grumble by those with better manners, those with a better understanding of what is right and good. In the face of this grumble, this disappointment from the establishment, this judgment from the crowd, Jesus, now I like to imagine he sat down for dramatic effect right now. Jesus sat down and he began to tell a story. There once was a man with 2 sons, he said. It's a familiar formulation. There once was. It's the biblical equivalent of once upon a time, like I can almost see the words begin to scroll up on a screen in my mind. Once upon a time in a land far away. A simple start for a story, and yet one that captures our attention and opens our imagination. Through this parable, Jesus tells the story of an estranged family today. A brother who comes to his father and demands his share of an inheritance not yet earned, his share of a property that a father divides, property. Bios is the Greek word. It literally is asking this father to give him a portion of his own life. It flies in the face of the tradition of this time. To put it in our language, how rude. And if that were not enough, the story goes on to reveal that fortune squandered in front of us. And in the pit of despair, this newly broke, now starving son recognizes his folly and makes up his mind to return home and beg for a place of servitude rather than remaining in this pitiful state and dying. Begging, he decides, just to survive. And upon arriving, he is met by his father, who runs and welcomes him with arms wide open, offering him an equal, restored place in his family, an action that was a step too far for the older brother, it seems, who we meet standing outside, yelling for his father, waiting to share the litany of the younger son's misdeeds. It is a powerful story, and it connects to each of us in a lived way. Don't believe me? Well, let's try this. I know it's not very Episcopal, but a quick show of hands. How many people here today can picture that member of your family? That one that could do no wrong in the eyes of the family, the one that never seemed to get into any real trouble, or at least wasn't punished justly, and had things just a bit easier than everyone else. Go ahead, slip your hand up. Okay. Now, I can't imagine this person, but how many of you can picture that member of your family that always felt as though their experiences were just a little bit harder than everyone else's, their punishment a little unjust, and that they should be recognized more often? The one that didn't feel as though the gifts they had to offer to the family were really appreciated. So we know this story then, right? We know this story intimately. And perhaps that's why we are retelling it today, restorying this. For there is a liberating truth here for us all. Our gospel today offers us an opportunity to stop, to pause this Lent, and to see ourselves, if only for a moment, to recognize what is and what could be in our place in God's cosmic story. The reality is that it is altogether too easy for us to locate ourselves as a specific character in this story, isn't it? And how we identify ourselves today has a lot to depend with the circumstances that brought us through those red doors or onto this stream. Those thoughts that enable us, and maybe the ones that frighten us as well. We could be the younger child, self-determined and eager to branch out, alienated, defeated, wondering if our shame is all that there is for us. We could be the older child, eager to please, hardworking, entitled, wondering if anyone truly recognizes our gifts. We hope to be the father, generous, patient, forgiving, wondering at the beauty of possibility all around us. Now, any of these thoughts are worthy of our time and attention, worthy of our prayer and reflection. But I sometimes wonder if we've missed the plot. If in our haste to identify ourselves as the correct character from this story, have we lost our connection to the lived experience of this story and what that might hold for us still today? It may seem simplistic, but hang with me for just a bit longer. What if the best context for today is to understand that we are living in a similar time as those who gathered and those who grumbled around Jesus? Really think about that. The folks that were gathering around Jesus were real people, after all, not imagined characters. They were tax collectors and sinners, the gospel says, members and representatives of an oppressive and colonizing empire. They executed unchecked authority over the community, taking what they wanted when they wanted it, with little regard for others. They lived lives of luxury in the face of the poverty of their neighbors. They were the literal face of oppression. So, of course, the Pharisees and scribes would have grumbled. And it's important to note that the writers are not necessarily telling us that they are without compassion or good manners. It simply says they grumbled. And why wouldn't they? For Jesus to gather and eat with these tax collectors would not only have been politically incorrect, it would also have been seen as a betrayal of his relatives and perhaps even his culture. This would almost have certainly been front of mind for the Pharisees and scribes as Jesus began to tell the story of this young son who squanders the hard work and name of his family. The Pharisees and scribes would have understood that story as it began to be a story of someone who chose to be detached from their family and culture. It would have been an unforgivable action. And so the expected conclusion by any one of these hearers would have been that this fracture was permanent, that just maybe Jesus was getting ready to tell all these sinners and tax collectors exactly how they were wrong in his plan for our world. But as the story continues, the younger son seems to display some unexpected remorse, going over the intrusive questions of his own worthiness, even working out a plan out loud, imagining how he might atone for the pain he caused to his family. What if I go home? What if I say out loud what I've done? What if I ask my father just to be seen as a slave? What if? What can I do? He doesn't know if he'll be welcomed at all, but he sets out on his journey home anyway. Imagine the tension that this crowd must have been feeling in this moment, wondering where the story might go. And this is where things got really weird. The gospel text introduces us to the father, who at this point has been relatively quiet. And we see him scanning the distance for his lost son. And then the text tells us that while his son was still far off, the father saw him and was filled with compassion, a particular word that's used only one other time in this gospel, and that he ran, and put his arms around his filthy son and kissed him, defying all dignified behavior for someone of his station. He literally ran, hiking up his robes to get there as quickly as possible, and then publicly restoring his son, ushering him to a lavish welcome home party. The noise of this party is disturbing to the older son, who's been working all day in the fields. And when he realizes what has happened, well, he loses it a little bit. The text tells us that he is angered, and indignant, refusing to go to the party. And when his father comes out, he pleads with him. His anger then reveals a bitterness, his own sense of what he has earned and what has been denied of him. Note that the father doesn't make an attempt to disagree with his elder son or even to correct him. The text says he pleads with his older son. He pleads with him to come in anyway. You have been with me, he says. Everything I have is yours, but this son of mine was lost. This brother of yours has been found. We had to celebrate. With that, the story ends. It's rather anticlimactic, really, when you think about it. We're left to guess that the father must have walked away, but we don't know what else happens. This is what's so interesting, that in that moment, we are left with the biblical hanging chad. We don't know what the older son does. We don't know if he goes into the party or has anything else to say. It's left to us. This is the great power, I think, of this parable. It challenges our capacity to imagine new worlds and ways of being. Through the pleading of this father, it reveals a tender truth that if we were honest, we are most like these Pharisees and scribes, most like this elder son most of the time, predetermining who is worthy of our time and attention, who is worthy of our notice and affection. That in the face of all the need we see in our world, hunger, injustice, discrimination, we, like this older son, have an inward voice that says, but I'd worked so hard. That there might be a possibility that anything that's gained by someone else must come at a loss to me, a cost to us. Today, our God is fully seen in the character of this parent, leaving the bliss of celebration to come outside into the pain and questions of our real life. Our God is about the work of reconciliation, understanding that reconciliation is finding a harmony between possibility and reality. A work that God gives to us today, the work of reconciliation that has become our task, speaking tenderly of a love that has always been present, an unbounded grace that is beyond measure despite the scarcity that governs our imagination, then offering us a path beyond our fear. Can you hear the sound of music today? Do you feel the stomp of the feet in the room next to you as the party goes on, the laughter calling to you to come in? What if just beyond our entitlement and fear, there really is plenty? Room for us all, despite what we have done and what we have left undone. God's vision of a world that's more than our isolation and fear, more than our individualism. What a world that would be. And wouldn't that be something to celebrate? I guess the question still remains then, will we go to the party? Amen.